Hello everybody and welcome to today's video on time constants, a concept of mechanical ventilation. Let's get right into it. So the objectives for today are to recite the textbook definition of a time constant, understand the actual concept of a time constant and what that represents. We are going to relate the concept of the time constant to respiratory physiology and understand where that plays into things. Then we are going to do some math. Oh boy, we're going to calculate time constant based on airway resistance and respiratory system compliance. And we are going to apply time constant to clinical practicum, meaning we're actually going to use it to do something. And it's not on here, but we're also going to kind of explain why it's good to actually pay attention to. Okay, so time constants. First, I just want to say that this is a concept that, at least where I'm located at, we don't really pay a whole lot of attention to. If you are like me, you're a respiratory therapist or maybe an RT student in school, you know, we all read Egan's, and there was, I don't know, one little blurb, maybe 2-3 paragraphs talking about the time constant and what it is, but it really doesn't talk about the actual significance of that or anything. We're going to start with the good old Egan's definition of time constant and kind of take it from there, right? So the definition here, one time constant is the time it takes for an alveolus to inflate or deflate by 63% of the maximum. Okay? So that means it's the time it takes for an alveolus to deflate by almost 2/3, essentially, or to fill by almost 2/3. You have both inspiratory and expiratory time constants. Through this video, I am going to talk about both. The expiratory time constant is the one that we kind of sort of pay a bit more attention to, but inspiratory time constant is kind of good to know as well. So one time constant is filling or emptying by 63%. Two time constants is 86% filling or emptying, and three time constants is 95% filling or emptying, aka close enough it's basically all out or all in. Now the concept. This is a lot of, it's percentages, it's whatever. What does that mean? Why do I care? Okay, I want you to think of time constant as how quickly or how slowly the lungs fill and empty. When you hear time constant, I want you to think the speed of filling and the speed of emptying, okay? A bigger number, and we measure time constants in seconds, so a bigger number means slower filling, slower emptying. And inspiratory and expiratory to go together. As I said, you have both an inspiratory and expiratory time constant. They are not the same, but they are affected by the same things. So a long inspiratory time constant means you're probably going to have a long expiratory time constant too, most of the time. But that's what I just want to think conceptually. Speed of filling and emptying. That's what's important. The percentages, the numbers, we're going to come back to that later. I don't want you to focus too much on that right now. Just think about speed of filling and emptying. Now we are going to get into the physiology of it. So the time constant, how quickly it fills and empties, is affected by both resistance and compliance. And if this is not the first video of mine you've watched, you've probably gotten the balloon analogy before, but I'm just going to say it again. Imagine you're blowing up a balloon with a straw. A stiff balloon, right? A new stiff balloon, you blow it, you don't get a lot of volume in there, right? It fills very quickly, but not very much, right? It's over very quick, but it's not a lot of volume. And then when you let it go and it empties, it snaps back very quickly, right? A loose balloon, an old, saggy, floppy balloon, and it blows up and blows up and blows up and keeps going because it's not as elastic, right? It's going to have relatively slow filling, and then when you let it go, it has relatively slow emptying as well because it's saggy. It doesn't have as much elastance. All right? That means that a stiffer lung, a lower compliance lung, is going to fill and empty quickly, meaning it's going to have a shorter time constant. Now let's talk about the straw, right? So you're blowing up that balloon with a straw. A skinnier straw, think about it. Have you ever tried to drink through like a little coffee stirrer or something like that? It's pretty hard, right? Skinny straw, try to blow up that balloon. It's going to take a very long time to fill up that balloon. And same thing, when you let go, it's going to take a very long time for that balloon to empty because you have such a big resistance. You got a straw this big, right? So higher airway resistance is also going to mean slower filling and emptying. Now let's talk more about the physiology. So we already said that basically this is affected by resistance and compliance, right? Each alveolus, each alveolar unit has its own local resistance and compliance. They won't all fill at the same time, right? You have healthy alveoli that are, very compliant, right? You have diseased alveoli that are not very compliant. You might have local differences in mucus secretions, that kind of stuff that might create more local airway resistance in the bronchioles, that kind of stuff, right? In a diseased lung, right? In a healthy lung, actually, a lot of the studies have shown that there really isn't that much local or regional difference in compliance and resistance in a healthy lung. But in a diseased lung, in your patient with ARDS, who also has COPD in the background, who's on a vent, there is a lot of regional and local differences in alveolar resistance and compliance. Now, here's an interesting thing, right? So you have some alveoli that are going to fill very quickly and then stop because their compliance sucks. They're super stiff. You give them a volume of 500, you give them an inspiratory pressure of 14, whatever, it's going to fill quick, and then it's just going to sit there. Then you have those healthier alveoli, or let's say in your emphysema patient, those emphysematic alveoli that are way more compliant, they're going to fill really, 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 really slowly, right? So when the inspiratory flow stops, right, if you do a breath hold, an inspiratory hold, the alveoli with the longer time constant will fill with gas from the shorter time constant alveoli. This is called Pendeluft. That's a German word. I'm sure I butchered it. I don't care, whatever. The point is, right, those really stiff alveoli, you do a breath hold, right? You cut off the flow. Those stiff alveoli are going to release a little bit, and some of that gas is going to keep flowing into the other more compliant alveoli and continue to fill them. And you can actually see that during an inspiratory pause on the ventilator. Your plateau pressure will actually drop a little bit, just a little. It's not a huge drop, right? It's not enough to make you think, oh, there's a leak, but it's going to drop just enough for you to notice, and that is local redistribution of gas from those really stiff alveoli to those more resistant alveoli and more normal alveoli. And while we're talking about this whole kind of redistribution of gas exchange and everything, another kind of phenomenon that's going on there when you have an inspiratory pause or like a long inspiratory time is you have alveolar filling via collateral ventilation. You have collateral routes of ventilation not only between alveoli, but between alveoli and bronchioles, and from bronchioles to other bronchioles as well. And those routes of collateral ventilation, over time will also redistribute that tidal volume as well. So just think about that. When everything is paused, we say that gas flow, right? Like flow stops moving, right? When you're getting your static compliance, when you're doing your inspiratory hold, everything is still, but not really, because gas is still moving from one alveolus to another within the lungs because they have different time constants, right? Different alveoli are diseased, alveoli are not diseased, and gas is going to be moving back and forth, right? It's basically going down the path of least resistance first before going down the path of more resistance. Now, kind of the point of saying all that, something just a little food for thought for you here, is that when you have a really short inspiratory time, only alveoli with short time constants will fill. A longer inspiratory time is needed to recruit more compliant or resistant units, right? You are not going to get much ventilation into those alveoli in obstructed areas, or even those normal alveoli, when you have an ARDS patient on a really fast rate and a really short I time, right? You're just going to be filling up those short time constant alveolar units and filling up and releasing, filling up, releasing, filling up, releasing, right? You need a bit of a pause, you need a bit of a longer I time in order to recruit more alveoli, right? If you want to improve gas exchange, you want to improve oxygenation, and you want to maybe over time improve compliance and recruit more stuff, you need longer I times or more mean airway pressure in order to fill everything up. So here's a little picture here. The picture on the left is this Pendeluft phenomenon I'm talking about. You can see, I don't know if it'll let me, oh yeah, here's my mouse. So you can see here, you have your peak inspiratory pressure. This is obviously in like a volume control mode, right? Because we can see our rising inspiratory pressure. At peak inspiratory pressure, we can see here we hold a plateau. And watch what happens. Over time, it's dropping, it's dropping, it's dropping, it's dropping even more, right? Our plateau is dropping. Do we have a leak? Is our volume leaking out? No. This is a very slow, gradual drop. There is not a leak here. What's going on is there's redistribution of pressure and thus volume among lung units with different time constants, right? That's what I was just talking about. And then this big old thing over here is those routes of collateral ventilation. You have the alveolar pores of Kohn. Those are going from one alveolus to another. You have channels of Lambert, which go from the bronchioles to the alveoli, and you have interbronchial channels of Martin as well, right? So all these things can cause collateral ventilation, right? So even if there is, say, a blockage, there's a mucus plug over here, if you have routes of collateral ventilation, now here's the thing, these airways are more narrow than this airway, right? With a really short I time, you're probably not going to get much, if any, flow or any volume into this blocked alveolus, right? Because there are just these really, really small routes of collateral ventilation. But with a longer I time or an inspiratory pause, some of that flow might redistribute into this alveolus with high resistance, right? Once again, something to think about. Long I times, so long as the patient can tolerate it, and that's the big problem, but long I times are usually better for recruitment and for ventilation and that kind of stuff. You're really, really going to reduce your dead space and your shunting, I suppose, more so with longer I times. But you can really only do that in pressure control unless you want to flow starve your patient. Anyway, kind of got off track there, but just things to think about. Now, with time constants, what's normal? So in a non-vented patient, 0.1 to 0.2 seconds is normal. You will have total filling and emptying of the lungs in about 0.6 seconds. Here's the thing. Once you stick an ET tube down somebody's trachea, that's a lot more airway resistance, right? A normal vented patient is going to have a normal time constant of about 0.5 to 0.7 seconds. It might take them 1.5 to 2 seconds to exhale, potentially. And a time constant of less than 0.5 indicates a restrictive patient, and a time constant of greater than 0.7 indicates an obstructive patient, some kind of airway resistance component. Oh no, we're gonna do math. Ugh. Okay, so we talked about the concepts. We talked about Pendeluft, redistribution of ventilation. We talked about collateral ventilation. We talked about all those concepts. What fills quickly, what fills slowly. Well, let's talk about how do we actually use this thing? How do we use this concept, and what do we do with it? Well, we have to do a little bit of math. I'm sorry, but we do. All right. There are actually several methods to calculate time constant, but here's kind of like a common one. Apparently, all the methods are close enough to being accurate to each other, but this is just like a really, really common one that's probably the easiest to do because it doesn't involve like complex like computer models and all sorts of BS. So your time constant here is equal to your airway resistance times your compliance. Your airway resistance is your driving pressure divided by flow, and then we times that by 60 because we want this basically in seconds, right? So that's what we're doing here. And then your static compliance is your tidal volume divided by driving pressure. So let's take an example here. Let's say we have a patient on, I don't know, volume control ventilation, whatever, who cares? This patient has a driving pressure of 14, their expiratory flow is 45, and their tidal volume is 500. So let's do a little math. So here we're doing airway resistance. Your driving pressure divided by flow, 14 divided by 45. We're multiplying that by 60 to get seconds. We have 18.66. And this is airway resistance measured in centimeters of water per liter per second. So 18.66 centimeters of water per liter per second. You with me so far? Now we're doing our static compliance. 0.5 divided by 14. And this is 0.036. Whoa. What? That's weird. Shouldn't it be a number like, in the 30s, 40s, 50s? Well, here's the thing. This looks weird because normally static compliance is measured in milliliters per centimeters of water. So this is like 36 milliliters per centimeters of water. But we have to convert to equal units in order to, do the math here and for the math to math properly, right? So we have to, divide it by 1,000 so that we can actually put it into our equation here. Otherwise, we're going to get ridiculous, silly numbers that don't make sense. So 0.036 liters per centimeter of water. And then all we do is we multiply these two numbers together. 18.66 times 0.036 is approximately 0.66 seconds. So our time constant for this patient with this data is 0.66 seconds. Ooh, wasn't that painful? Okay, now let's do a little more math. We said way back towards the beginning that 3 time constants was 95% filling or emptying, and was close enough. That was basically complete filling or emptying, like good enough, right? Well, so we have to take our time constant here, multiply by 3, and we get, it's like 1.999999. I'm just going to call it 2 seconds. So we now know this patient needs 2 seconds for total emptying of their lungs, aka no auto peeping. So we can do some more quick maths. their max respiratory rate that we can put them on, you know, in order to prevent air trapping is 20 if we have an inspiratory time of 1 second. Now, whoa, how did you get there? Where did that come from? Okay, well, I need 2 seconds for exhalation. So we have 60 seconds in a minute, right? If we take 60 seconds and, you know, we want 1 second for inspiration and 2 seconds for exhalation, let's say, for example, well, that's 3 seconds. So that's a total cycle time of 3 seconds. How many breaths per minute is that? Well, 60 divided by 3 gives you 20, right? And we can change that, right? If we wanted 0.5 seconds, then we only need to do, you know, a 2.5 second total cycle time, right? We can do 60 divided by 2.5, which I'm not going to do off the top of my head, but, you know, that's something greater than 20. I know that, for example. So that's kind of how we do some quick math there. And that lets you determine, okay, now I know exactly what I can put my respiratory rate up to before I run the risk of making this patient air trap. Pretty cool, huh? Now I know what you're thinking. Do I really have to do the math? Oh God, do I really, is this necessary? Can't I just look at the expiratory flow waveform to make sure I'm not auto-peeping, call it a day? Well, look, you probably don't need to do the math, okay? Calm down, it's all right. Most modern vents are going to calculate the time constant for you. I know for a fact the servo does, like the servo U. I know for a fact the Hamilton vents will do it as well. The C6, and I'm pretty sure the C1 will as well. And I'm like 85% sure that the Draeger vents will too. You know, so I mean, if you're running like a, you know, if you're still running like a PB840 or something like that, I mean, God help you. I don't know, maybe it does calculate it for you. I have no idea. But at the very least, most vents, if they don't calculate it for you, they're at least going to give you your airway resistance and static compliance numbers already, so that you can at least just take those two numbers and do the quick multiplication and get your time constant that way, right? If nothing else. So you might have to do a little bit of quick math, but really nothing crazy. But here's the thing. You do need to calculate your time needed for complete exhalation, time constant times 3, if you want to be an actual clinician that makes decisions based on clinical data and not just a technician that turns dials, right? That's what we are, right? We are clinicians. We make decisions based on clinical data. We don't just guess things. We don't just go off of vibes, right? We make clinical decisions. This is a tool that lets you make clinical decisions without just guessing. Sorry, got a little intense there. Okay, the fun part, clinical practice. So there are several benefits of paying attention to your time constant, both inspiratory and expiratory. Once again, pretty much this whole time I've been talking about expiratory time constants, because really the negative side effects of not paying attention to your expiratory flow are greater than the side effects of not paying attention to your inspiratory flow, because auto-peep can be dangerous. Auto-peep can cause, you know, ineffective triggers and all sorts of problems, and it's just really, really bad. So expiratory is more important than inspiratory, but you should probably pay attention to both, right? Anyway, so the benefits of looking at this. First of all, it lets you actually determine, as I said, your expiratory time based on math and based on the patient's condition, instead of just guessing based on the expiratory flow waveform. And you might think, well, you know, I can just do my expiratory hold and get the auto peep and just look at the expiratory flow waveform. Okay, what are you going to do if your patient has a lot of, like, you know, active inspiratory effort and that kind of stuff, and, you know, they're over breathing the vent? Sometimes it's kind of hard to tell. Sometimes it's hard to actually really see what your expiratory time is. And could that also mean it's hard to determine time constant? Yeah, possibly. But, you know, certain things like the expiratory flow, that kind of stuff, you can still see. And driving pressure, you should be able to get a pretty close number on, even if your patient is breathing, especially if they're in pressure control or something like that. So really, it's a more accurate way of determining things rather than just guessing based on waveforms. The second thing is it gives you a quick and dirty indication of overall compliance and resistance. I go in there, I do my inspiratory and expiratory holds, get my data, and I pay attention to my patient's time constant, even though sometime I'm going to get to later, nobody else in my hospital seems to care about that. Because if that starts to drop, I know that, okay, I have this patient who's already kind of stiff. That's kind of another indicator that they're probably getting stiffer, right? And I can tell, you get to the point where you can kind of tell, and I talked about this with the APRV video, you can tell just by looking at that flow waveform, right? You look at the inspiratory, expiratory flow, you see it come to baseline quicker, and you go, oh man, they're getting stiffer, or vice versa, right? Oh man, they're getting more compliant. It's not returning to baseline as quickly, right? And you can kind of tell, and you don't have to calculate your time constant to know that, but you have to know about the concept of time constant to understand that, to understand, oh crap, they're exhaling quicker. That's in a restrictive patient, in an ARDS patient, that's not a good thing, right? Now, if it's your asthmatic and they're actually coming to baseline quicker, that's great. It means they're improving, right? That's the next thing, right? Third, allows for numerical assessment of response to treatments like bronchodilators, besides just looking at PIP minus plat. Yes, I know you can look at PIP minus plat and that will tell you too, but once again, you can just look at your flow waveform and you can go, oh, okay, yeah, it's coming to baseline quicker, right? Or you can get your time constant real quick and there you have an actual number, boom. And you can say, hey, this number is better than the number I got before, right? They have a shorter time constant now. It looks like all Betterall is working, for example. And another thing here at the bottom, there's been a novel study that shows possible usage of time constant as a method for determining optimal PEEP. So kind of what they're going for in this study here, once again, like I said, if you have a restrictive patient, right, and their lungs are getting less compliant, they're going to exhale quicker, right? And expiratory flow tends to be more passive than inspiratory flow. So hence, looking at your expiratory flow and looking at your expiratory time constant might be a more accurate way to assess compliance and response to PEEP and recruitment and stuff, versus looking at data that requires on inspiratory things. Possibly. Now, I'm not going to go out there and say, oh, you should do PEEP titration based off of time constant. Now, I'm not going to say that because it's one novel study, but it's just an interesting concept, interesting food for thought that it can maybe potentially be used for, assessing compliance, assessing response to things, right? It's more than just making sure your patient isn't air trapping. I mean, that's important, but it's more than just that, too. So here are my references here. I got quite a few. This article here at the bottom, I think I'm going to try to link that in the actual description of the video because it's a very good one. Now, it kind of goes into probably a lot more detail than you need to know. It's meant for physicians and that kind of stuff. But it's really good and has good references in it as well. So now that we're done with kind of the actual lecture part of this, I'm going to do what I normally do, which is actually get hands-on with a ventilator and show you some stuff and show you some time constants in real time. Okay, here we are back in my favorite Hamilton vent trainer. No, I am not sponsored by Hamilton. Yes, Hamilton, I will accept a sponsorship if you offer it to me. So here we have a patient. You can set your compliance and resistance, which I love. I have it set at the default, 100% compliance, 10 centimeters per liter per second of resistance. This is the default, standard conditions, whatever. Here's our patient here. And hey, look at this. You know what this number is? This is your expiratory time constant. They call it RCX. Look, when you go look at studies, they're going to all call it different things. Some just call it T. I call it TC for time constant because I feel like that, makes sense. But there's all sorts of acronyms and whatever weird naming schemes for it. Who cares? Doesn't matter. So here we have all of our clinical data. Now, something I'm going to note of just an interesting note because I'm a nerd. I actually went ahead and actually calculated everything here when I was messing around with this earlier. And when you start to play with the numbers and everything, they don't always completely add up. Like these actually might, I don't know. Anyway, okay, I just cut out a bunch of stuff, but so I just manually calculated right here my time constant. Here you have our driving pressure divided by our flow times 60 multiplied by our tidal volume in liters, 0.5, divided by our driving pressure, 8. And this is all numbers it's giving me. And it's giving me 0.59, so about 0.6. And this says it's 0.7. So that's kind of a big discrepancy, which is weird. So you can see the numbers they give you here don't quite add up. So am I saying you shouldn't trust the time constant the ventilator gives you? No, I'm not going to say that because I have no idea if that's a problem with this vent simulator. I don't know if that's a problem with, the math going on in the background. I don't know if that's a problem with the vent itself. I have no idea, right? So this is a simulation. Don't take it too seriously, but just know that I was messing around and the numbers don't quite add up, which is kind of funny, and I don't know why. Anyway, I've wasted enough time already. Let's kind of look at some things. So here's our time constant here, and we can kind of see that represented. Actually, I'm going to put in pressure control because I feel like low-key it kind of makes it a little easier to tell what's going on. Now, going off of this, 0.70 times 3, 7, 14, 21, I need 2.1 seconds of exhalation time. I'm sorry, so 2.1 seconds, and I have an I time of 0.9. That gives me a max rate of 20. Well, I'm not going to go anywhere near 20. I'm going to bump this up. Now we need 3.4 seconds. So my max respiratory rate is 17, which I'm not going to go to 17. I'm going to stay right here at 12. See, I did that without any guessing. Now, obviously, expiratory flow returns to 0. And we can see real quick. Auto peep 0. I bumped the rate up to, ignore the alarms. I bumped the rate up to 17. You can see auto peep 0.3. Yeah, it's negligible. Basically close enough to 0, right? Very negligible auto peep, right? But we're kind of at the limit. And we go to 18. Starts to raise a little bit. Right, we go up more. Now we're starting auto peep for sure. Right, we're getting there. Still not like really crazy auto peep, but you get the point, right? So time constant works. So let's visualize real quick how time constant changes as the patient's condition changes. And we can see in pressure control both inspiratory and expiratory time constants, right? So first of all, let's see, what does it take for us to get to baseline on inspiratory? Now we can see right now we have an inspiratory pressure of 14, but our driving pressure is only 12, which means we're not coming to baseline. Not all of that flow is reaching the alveolar level. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bump up my inspiratory time until it reaches baseline. This is something I try to do in my patients if they tolerate it. Now, if your patient is more awake, they probably not going to like really, really long I times, but still. Now, if I'm unsure, oh man, am I going to start air trapping because I'm upping my I time so much? Well, I don't have to guess. We can actually figure that out, right? So we said 2.1, and we have 1.8, right? What is that? 3.9, I think. So, all right, let's do the math. I'm stupid. I'm doing it backwards. I'm sorry. It's 3 a.m., y'all. Divided by 3.9 is where we're at right now. Okay, so now our max respiratory rate is 15, right? We can confirm we're not really auto-peeping. Let's see what happens when the patient changes. Let's see what happens when we go the other way. So let's say our compliance starts to get worse. what are we going to notice? And I want you to look not only just visually, but also look at the time constant. Our time constant is dropping. We are also coming to baseline quicker. We're coming to baseline really quick. Hey, look, now we got that driving pressure of 14, no problem, right? And our time constant has dropped too, right? So we can see not only visually, and not only by the fact that we lost tidal volume, but we can also see our time constant is now lower as well. We're inhaling and exhaling quicker, right? We'd have to really cut back. You know, I mean, we can leave this breath hold. We might get a little bit of collateral ventilation. We might get a little bit of that Pendeluft effect. But, you know, we can cut back a little bit. We maybe don't need all that eye time. And we are still coming to baseline completely on inspiration. Now let's look at the opposite. Let's bump our compliance all the way up. And let's visually watch what happens, and then also look at our time constant and see what changes there too. Now, as you can see, this isn't telling us inspiratory time constant, this is just telling us expiratory. But we can see as the expiratory flow changes, the inspiratory flow is definitely changing too, right? So once again, inspiratory and expiratory time constants are not the same thing. However, they are related and they are affected by the same thing. So when your expiratory time constant changes, you can make a safe assumption that your inspiratory time constant has also changed. Hey, look at that. We are no longer coming to baseline on inspiration. Exhalation, it looks like we still are, but this is barely. Now our time constant is 1.22. My gosh. It's not quite doubled from where it originally was, but it's much longer than it originally was, right? That's not good. I would now have to really, really drag out my inspiratory time to get its baseline, and then I'm probably not going to get its baseline on expiration, right? More than likely. Well, okay. So we see, visually, we see the numbers, how that's changed. But we're also getting huge tidal volumes now. See? So, like, we can tell our compliance increased, right? We can kind of use visual clues. See, that's the thing. Time constant by itself is not necessarily going to tell you if your compliance got better or your airway resistance got worse. You have to use other context clues, like, you know, your tidal volume, your compliance. You have to actually look at your compliance, that kind of stuff. Look at our static compliance. It's crazy now. It's ridiculous. Hey, look at that. We're back to normal. Okay, so now let's look at airway resistance, how that affects it. I'm going to bump it all the way up. I want you to look not only how the flow waveform changes, how this changes, and how tidal volume changes. Last time, this went up. This didn't come to baseline anymore, and this went up too. Let's see what happens now. So I can already see we're not coming to baseline. Time constant is going up. Tidal volume is going down, though. That's the thing. And you're going to notice the flow waveform looks a little different. It's not coming to baseline, but the shape, the slope is not as steep. When our compliance was better, see, here's the thing. When our compliance was better, okay, we were still getting good flows. It's just that more and more flow could go in, right? The alveoli were like, we can take more, give me more, give me more, give me more. And we got to the point where, like, we can't give you any more. We're out of time. But they would take more. They could fill more, right? They're filling slowly because they can take more and more and more, and they can fill more and more and more. Now, in this case, it is not true that the alveoli can take more what is true is that we now have an actual restriction to flow, and it takes a longer time to get the same amount of volume in there, right? We are seeing, let's go back to the balloon analogy. Maybe this will make it more simple. If you have that really floppy balloon, the old balloon that's saggy and high compliance, it's not hard to blow up. It's easy to blow up. It's just that you can keep blowing it up for a really long time if you wanted to, right? So it has a long time constant because it can just take more and more and more volume. The balloon with the skinny straw, it takes a really long time to fill up, but it's hard to fill up, right? It takes a really long time, not because it can take a lot of volume. It takes a really long time because you have a resistance to air movement. You have a resistance to flow that is obstructing you from delivering that volume. That is the difference. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. Okay, now we're going to take it all the way down. So now I want you to see what happens when we lower the airway resistance to 1. Not quite 0, but close to 0 airway resistance. This is going to be like breathing through a big fat boba straw. So, what do you notice is different about the shape of this one? Oh boy. So, we're coming to baseline really quickly, just like with the restrictive patient. But here's the thing, our tidal volumes are bigger than they would be with the restrictive patient, right? Really big tidal volumes. Because there's no resistance to flow. The flow just goes right in because there's 0 resistance. Well, 1 resistance, right? Look at our time constant. Stupid short. 0.16. What did we say was the normal time constant for a non-ventilated patient? 0.1 to 0.2. This is basically equivalent to somebody who's not tubed. This is what it would look like if you were ventilating somebody on a ventilator with no endotracheal tube, essentially, right? This is what their time constant would look like. This is also, and this is kind of going beyond this video, this also right here is the reason why intubating a status asthmaticus patient really, really sucks and is the last thing you want to do. Because this is where we start out with no airway resistance at all, right? This is the difference. You put that tube in, dramatically increases airway resistance. Now imagine on top of that, they're asthmatic. They're screwed, right? Food for thought. Anyway, coming out of baseline very, very quickly. This is basically a non-intubated person, right? You can have a really high respiratory rate on this person and they would not air trap. Think about your DKA patients, right? They have Kussmaul's respirations, fast, deep respirations. They're breathing stupid fast. They're breathing in the 30s, right? Won't even let me go higher than that. Will it? No, it won't. It's got the safeguard locked out. They're breathing super, super fast. And they're not even auto-peeping at all. They're not air trapping because they have completely normal lungs, right? As opposed to status asthmaticus, who's breathing really fast. And then they've got crazy airway resistance, right? Your status asthmaticus, that's breathing really fast. They're super air hungry. They need that air. Look at this. Look at the difference. That was no air trapping. Your DKA with the Kussmaul's. Now look at this. Look at the difference in volumes that we're getting. Look at our auto peep, it's 10. Our tidal volumes are almost nothing. This is your status asthmaticus. This is your status asthmaticus. This is what they're breathing like. They're not ventilating. They're not ventilating at all. Look at that time constant. This is kind of time constant you would see on a status asthmaticus patient. Okay, everybody, that's going to do it for today's video. I hope you learned something. I hope this was useful information. So just real quick, something that prompted me to make this video is that I feel like I have kind of a gut feeling that time constant is not something that a lot of RTs or even really a lot of clinicians in general know about. Now, I learned about this from a pulmonologist, but not one from where I live. I learned about it from one I follow on social media that has some really, really good education, and I started using it in my day-to-day clinical practice. Now, the thing is, I have a feeling that where I live, which is kind of the armpit of healthcare, it really sucks. Nobody knows what a time constant is. Nobody cares. I had a skills fair with some RT educators a few weeks ago, and they're very smart people, and we were talking about ventilating obstructive patients, and they were talking about low respiratory rates and doing your expiratory hold and looking at your expiratory flow to make sure it's coming to baseline and make sure you're not auto peeping and blah blah blah. And I asked when the skills fair was over, I said, well, what do you think about using the time constant on the vent and using that to calculate what your expiratory time should be with these patients? Do you think that's a good method? And the educator kind of looks at me funny and goes, well, the time constant, he goes, well, I just don't really know. Like, I don't even really know what that's trying to measure. And I go, oh, wait, so do you mean like on the servos, it's like the time constant is inaccurate? Are you saying like it doesn't calculate it properly? Or, and he goes, well, no, I just mean like on every patient, it's different. It's just spitting out different numbers, and I don't know what it's trying to tell me. I don't really know what that. It seems arbitrary. And I thought to myself, I didn't say anything. I just said, oh, okay, I guess I'll just stick with expiratory holds and looking at the waveform. But I thought to myself, oh my God, this guy doesn't know what a time constant is. Yeah, it's different on every patient because every patient needs a different amount of time to inhale and exhale because their lungs are not homogeneous. What do you mean you don't know what it's trying to measure? What? So, and here's the thing. Once again, I would not expect a student to know what a time constant is. I would not expect a average RT to know what a time constant is. Heck, I wouldn't even expect like a pretty knowledgeable RT to know what a time constant is. But the educator, the clinical educator, doesn't know what a time constant is and doesn't know how to utilize that, especially for obstructive patients with severe airway resistance. That's crazy. That and I kind of I was like, wow, oh my God, I really live in the armpit of America. Nobody knows what they're doing here. And that's kind of exaggeration because like this educator, he is a smart guy. I don't want to trash him too much. He knows a lot of stuff about a lot of things. But the fact that he knew nothing about time constants just kind of like boggled my mind because I'm like, I thought for sure this guy would have known. He's like, it's his job to be a nerd and like know these kind of things, and he doesn't know. So anyway, the point of that rant is I want to know, wherever you guys live in the world or the USA or whatever, do you guys utilize time constants in your practice? Is it something you do? If not, are you going to start looking at that now? If you're students, are you going to start looking at that now? Are you going to impress your preceptors in clinical by telling them about time constants? Actually, maybe don't do that, because they're probably going to look at you the same way that educator looked at me and go, I don't even know what you're talking about. And they're just going to like dismiss it as like mumbo jumbo nonsense and move along. But yeah, time constant. Really cool concept. Very practical, kind of a nice little clinical tool and good information to have in your back pocket. Anyway, that's going to do it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time.